very real. I understand your confusion. He said that I was on another world, that it was outside of my universe. So I wanted to understand how that's possible. And he says, well, there are many universes, and you have just passed from yours into ours. All right, so where is this universe? He said, it wouldn't do me any good to even try to explain it to you. I asked him how I'd gotten there. Well, apparently, these folks, whoever they are, had been very curious about the nature of the universe. In order to understand their universe, they tried to recreate, using what they knew, to recreate a model of the universe. But what had happened is that when they had recreated this, their creation had started to evolve. It had evolved up to a point to where it stopped growing. It was quite large, and that they had created another universe inadvertently. They weren't planning on doing this. And it had evolved, and it evolved quite rapidly. I said, well, I don't understand this because we think the universe is billions and billions of years old. He says, well, where you are, you measure time much differently. Time is different in every universe. We've watched for the past, and he was struggling with terms that didn't make any sense to me. For him, it had been, let's say, a few decades. But within that universe that I had just come from, it was billions of years. Time was remarkably different for me than it was for him. And so then I started thinking, how long have I been here? Because Kathy was like 11:20, 11:30 at night at Lake Titicaca. The breeze is blowing. It's 13,000 feet elevation. It's just cold as hell. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, it could be decades past by the time I get home. I didn't have any idea how long I'd been gone. My watch was just dead. It was one of those Timex that had the gizmo on there for altitude and temperature and barometer and all that. It was new, but it just was dead. I started getting a bit frantic with him and telling him, how do I get back home? He says, well, you should be able to get back home the same way you got here. And I said, I don't think that you have a doorway here. I don't see anything. It's just all white. And he says, well, it's just all white because of the chamber that you're in. And he says, we can help you get back home. Don't be afraid. I said, all right. Then what do I need to do? Because I really need to go right now. And I explained to him, Kathy is there waiting, and if I'm really gone, then she's going to be really afraid. And the other people that were with me are going to be equally worried. He says, all right, turn to your right. Now to start walking forward in a straight line. And I started walking forward. And it's like I went past a wall. As I came around, he says, all right, you see that in the distance, probably 100 feet from me. He says, just walk towards that. It was this large, black, gelatinous-looking thing just floating in the air. It was black, but you could see all these pinpoints of light. It was peppered with light and dark areas. And I said, what is this? And he said, that's the universe you came from. Well, this thing, it had these rods that were luminous, like neon. There was little beads of light moving through them, kind of like a fluorescent bulb, overhead fluorescent that gets bad and has like little dark areas moving through it, except the dark areas were a different color. Some were yellow.
I'm holding in my hand the illustration that you emailed to me, and my first reaction was, you are the figure in the foreground.
Right, about 100 feet away from that thing.
Did you get telepathic communication from the male voice about what the rods are doing with this gelatinous cosmic mass?
Well, the rods, they were around its perimeter. Didn't even look like they were connected to anything. They didn't seem to have any reason to be placed the way they were placed. It was very abstract. I said, these light rods. What's that? And he says, well, that holds it in place. It maintains the balance. And we think that's the reason why it stopped evolving.
So did they deliberately try to stop the evolution of this universe?
I think so. And when he was telling me about this, they were really very afraid that it was going to continue growing and it would just overwhelm them, and then what would happen to them? It was quite a conundrum, the way he described it.
So they're in another universe, and they created in this other universe a laboratory universe to test or learn something. And then their laboratory test universe took off somehow and created the universe that you and I and everything in our universe is.
He had told me that they were trying to understand their place within their universe, and that what they had discovered is that they were inside of someone else's universe, just like we were inside of theirs. It's just layers and layers, and there's very little that separates one from the other. That's what they had learned.
This 13.9 billion light year universe, from our point of view, is inside of the voice in the all white room universe, and that universe is in another universe. It's like you're describing those Russian dolls that all fit inside of each other.
That's what Kathy was saying too. It's just like Russian dolls. I said, what kind of machine would you use to do this? He tried to explain it. The closest thing that I can explain was what we call the Large Hadron Collider, a big